Society organizations are urging President Cyril Ramaphosa to reconsider the Children's Amendment Bill. The draft law makes wide-ranging changes to the 2005 Children's Act. It was submitted to Parliament back in February. 50 organizations are calling for a review of the parts that relate to early childhood development programs. Let's discuss this further now. I'm joined by human rights lawyer Tess Peacock via Skype this morning. Tess, a very good morning to you. Now, we've had various discussions, especially when it comes to, and I see that adoption of children is one of the issues. We've had that discussion with interested parties a couple of weeks ago. What are the other issues about this bill that has organizations up in arms about it? Thank you.
Good morning, Rebecca. So the main issue, I mean, there are multiple issues, as you say, and adoption is one of them. I'm particularly focused on early childhood development specialist, and government on multiple platforms has explained that early childhood development is one of their poverty alleviation development priorities. And the last two SONA presidential announcements were made in that regard, the National Development Plan, etc. But the current legal framework doesn't actually enable the achievement of those objectives. And so civil society was really hoping that multiple amendments would be made in this current amendment process that would make that environment much more enabling. And it frankly just hasn't achieved that. Worse than that is that there are regressive amendments that have crept into this latest amendment bill. And ultimately what that's going to mean is fewer opportunities for poor children to access funding from government. So it's quite alarming to think, what are the rationales behind some of the aggressive amendments? So instead of taking the opportunity to really create an enabling framework to achieve what are very, very important development objectives in relation to early childhood development, we see some of these kind of strange regressive amendments, proposed amendments being put in place instead.
Give us some idea
so we
of
really
those,
see it as a missed opportunity.
Give us some idea of what some of those regressive amendments are. And I see a lot of this centered around funding and money as well for early childhood development.
Yes. So the early childhood development space is quite unique and quite different to public education or public provision of education. So it's mostly provided by private providers and mostly provided in the context of poor private providers. And so accessing what's called the per child per day government subsidy is an essential part of ensuring the sustainability of an ECD center, but also ensuring that children get the requisite nutrition and are in health, in healthy and safe learning environments. And so what the proposed amendment does, for example, there's one that says, government must prioritize funding for poor communities. They've now changed that to a discretionary power may prioritize poor communities. So when, it baffles to think why you would want to change a mandatory power to prioritize poor communities, which is also kind of a constitutional imperative, to a discretionary power. I mean, it's quite unfathomable why you would change that to a discretionary power. And then the other examples where they've narrowed powers to assist communities who are struggling to comply with what's called the norms and standards. So in order for an ECD center to become registered, they have to comply with a whole range of norms and standards. And what the government's done is narrowed the ability to assist centres to comply by saying you have to first be conditionally registered. And that quite that already raises the threshold even more for and puts further hurdles in place for providers to get the assistance they desperately need from government. So in ed, you have a system which marginalizes most providers or most poor providers of ECD. And they can't get into the regulatory net, which means we can't really evaluate them and protect them, but also they can't access the per child per day subsidy, which means the children most in need of the support aren't getting it.
Well, I suppose, Tess, many might ask out there, surely this might be a way for government to, authorities to keep a better eye on where people are sending their children and who's doing what, considering what we've seen, popping up incidents that we've seen over the past couple of years as well of child abuse and child neglect at certain areas. But they might say, yes, of course, this might be a way of just enforcing better control. But the reality of this is that these ECD centres will remain open and will be the only place that some communities can actually go and send their children. And without this help, they will continue to suffer.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. If the requirement is that this is supposed to increase the regulation and oversight of these ECD centres, it's hard to see how that will actually play out. It's not. The ECD registration system envisages a progressive kind of improvement process. It's not one that is necessarily unlawful immediately if you haven't registered. For example, you've got to first be issued with a compliance notice, etc. And so it envisages this kind of progressive improvements. And so one really thinks that the pro-development and pro-poor approach is to ensure that most providers get the support that they need early on, and then they kind of walk through the journey of improving their norms and standards. The current legal framework, outside of the fact that there are regressive amendments creeping in, is also in a way puts all these kinds of obstacles in front of poor providers. There are about, in some instances, over 200 norms and standards that providers have to comply with. There's duplicated registration processes. You have to register twice. And so, for the last 10 years, the sector has been lobbying for government to streamline the registration processes and to really make the registration easier. And instead of, embarking on that kind of route to really achieve the laudable goals of government and the laudable goals of the NDP and the ECD policy, which is a brilliant policy that was finalized in 2015, the legal framework is actually not enabling of achieving those objectives. And the latest amendments don't, again, center the achieving of those objectives. So, we really see this as a complete missed opportunity. And the bill is currently not yet tabled with Parliament. And so we really, a part of the appeal is to get DSD and Cabinet to withdraw it from the processes and really, go back to the drawing board and reconsider some
and speak to the people who are actually involved in the process, those who actually work on the ground, to say, how can we help you? Because they do need help to get to that point. Thanks very much for that. That's Tess Peacock. She's a human rights lawyer, and just outlining for us the problems at the moment with the Children's Amendment Bill and what needs to happen, because it's not working for those most in need, it seems, at the moment.